and Van Adder. If all the members voted, tie the roll. Roll call shows 92 members present. The chair declares a quorum for conducting business. Please welcome today our doctors of the day, Dr. Harris Broman and Dr. Zenick from Ascension St. Vincent. Thank you, doctors. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when we do adjourn, we adjourn until April 13, 2023.
Heard the motion in a second. All those in favor, in case saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. That was 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. We'll now move to the second reading calendar. Senate Bill 3, Representative Thompson. Representative Thompson passes. Senate Bill 72, Representative Behning. Chair hands down on second reading, Senate Bill 72.
Senate Bill 72, a bill for enactment of the Indiana Code concerning education.
Bill's ready for amendment, recommended to engrossment. Chair sees none. Bill's ordered to engrossment. Senate Bill 242, Representative Baird. Chair hands down on second reading, Senate Bill 242.
Senate Bill 242, a bill for enactment to repeal a provision.
Bill's ready for amendment, recommended to engrossment. Representative Baird. House motion.
Senate Bill 242, Amendment 2. Mr. Speaker, I move that engrossed Senate Bill 242 be amended.
For the motion is second. The chair recognizes Representative Baird to speak on the amendment.
I think I've spoken more times passing on this than I have at the podium. But again, thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I bring to you today Amendment number 2. But I think it's important before I speak on the amendment to understand the intent of the underlying bill. Senate Bill 242 passed out of the Senate 40 to 5 and passed out of the Natural Resources Committee here in the House unanimously. The intent of the underlying bill was to repeal the DNR state floodplain maps. However, the language in Senate Bill 242 was in conflict with Senate Bill 412 that we've already passed out of this body. Hence the reason for this amendment. This amendment, quite simply, is my attempt to find a compromise regarding the state floodplain maps and not repeal them, but also to bring Senate Bill 242 into parity with Senate Bill 412. More specifically, this amendment pauses the use of the DNR state floodplain maps created via the use of the LIDAR for a period of 2 years. At which time this amendment also sets forth the policies and the procedures that the DNR must follow when communicating with local communities, floodplain administrators, and landowners before the state maps can be used by the local floodplain administrators. Now, I have placed a carve-out in that allows for the petitioner to request the use of the state DNR maps. And I think that's why it's important not to completely repeal these maps, but to allow that landowner to be empowered to make the choice that's best for that property. When the underlying bill was going through the Natural Resources Committee, which the DNR did not attend, the supporters used the words that the state LIDAR maps were the most complete, accurate, and up-to-date. I would disagree with this statement, as I would argue that they're not the most accurate, and they would not be accurate until these maps have gone through a public hearing and allowed the community to know what is happening in regards to the floodplain maps, and to allow the landowners the option and the process to appeal these maps. I feel like the LIDAR state maps that have been created are a good starting point. I feel like they might be 80 to 90% accurate, but it's critical that it does not become best use data until after the appeal process allows for landowners the opportunity to appeal the maps that the state has created. For that, I would ask for your support on this amendment, and thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Hamilton to speak on the amendment.
Will the author yield?
Will the author yield? He yields.
I've always wanted to say no, but I will say yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Baird, I appreciate your work on this bill. I have a link, and I appreciate your talking with me before session today about your amendment. I still am worried about potentially putting new projects in out of compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program. 90 of our 92 counties are part of that program. They have put ordinances in place that require best available data. I believe DNR believes that LIDAR is the best available data today. So is it possible that we could lose protection for any of these projects?
So I had the same exact concern. I appreciate the question. In my conversation with the DNR, that is not the case. So my conversation with the DNR, by putting a pause on the maps, like I have in this amendment, it would simply allow, we would roll back to where we were in 2018, before they created these maps. And so you would have the option of using FEMA map, which only covers about a third of the state. And if you are in a part of the state that's not covered by FEMA maps, then you would have a survey done, and that's what would determine if you were in a floodplain or not.
Okay.
So this would just be rolling us back to 2018, allow the DNR the opportunity to disseminate their information to the landowners, the floodplain administrators, and the local communities, so that we are all on the same page moving forward. And we don't do what we did last year, where the local floodplain administrator didn't know about the new state maps, agreed to the permits, allowed people to build into what would be a new state floodplain area, and then we came back here and passed special legislation because under the state maps, they were told they were going to have to tear down their houses, and last year we had that carve out and created a special exception for them. And what I'm trying to do is to prevent every year coming back and having these exceptions and carve outs. If we would just pause, make sure everybody's on the same page, allow people to have the opportunity to appeal and actually get good data. And I think you get that. I think the LIDAR maps are a good starting point, but I think it really becomes good data after it's had a public conversation and people have had a chance to appeal.
Okay, thank you. Permission to speak?
You're recognized, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I just still am very concerned that we would, with this amendment, continue to allow construction in flood zones, potentially have structures be unprotected, and ultimately cause more flooding on properties and downstream from those properties. I think we should revert to the language that's in code now and study this issue further to keep those protections in place with the best available data that the feds are requiring. I urge you to vote no.
For discussion on the amendment, Representative Abbott, speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in support of this amendment. Some of the questions that were brought up was about the fear of flooding and what this might do if we redact the DNR mapping. The truth be known, when you get a mortgage on a home, it's usually required to have flood insurance. The banks, and I could say if not 99 and 9/10% of the banks, almost all the banks, and I've spoke with the banking industry, do not require the DNR floodplain mapping. They use the FEMA maps, and in the absence of FEMA maps, they use the best available data not the DNR data, any data. It could be a survey. It could be other sources of prior surveys that were done. And secondly, FEMA does not require DNR mapping. This was a request from Okra at some local request to have some better mapping available, which we all support, better mapping. That's what we want to do. But to use this mapping right now, it's been told to me by one of the leading floodplain consultants in the state that the mapping is not as accurate as we think it is. It can be, first of all, radar, if you're not familiar with it, you fly in an airplane, you shoot a laser down, it beams the light up, and they do a three-dimensional contour image that they can construct the topography around the state. That's accurate within 2 feet. And if you're east of Fort Wayne in a flat area, 2 feet could be a mile. And as a lot of people have testified, especially in the city of Woodburn, where they were never in a floodplain, they did not have flooding, and all of a sudden they were in a floodplain, they had to stop a subdivision. 34-home subdivision was put on a work hold by the DNR because they wanted their mapping used. FEMA doesn't require it. All they require is the best federal, state, or other sources. It doesn't say DNR. We think there's, and back to my consultant that I'm telling you about, he even says that the way they determine, even if the contour, even if the FEMA is completely accurate, let's just assume that for a matter, then how do you determine what the flood water is? Is it the 100-year flood from what? The last 5 years? You know, usually we look back with crop productivity, with assessments, we look back for the trend and we determine our policy going forward and adjust it as needed. This is looking forward, possibly. Are we looking at predictive rainfall amounts in the future to determine this? Yet we've had many, many property owners come to us and say, we've never had floods in this area. Not 100-year floods that are, you know, but I think the maps, what they're doing is they're putting out some data that is questionable at best. And we do agree, we need to have statewide floodplain data that's good. But putting this on hold for 2 years will not jeopardize your national floodplain insurance. I've read that's in the federal statute. We've had advice on that. And it will put the decision, as Representative Baird said, in the property owner's decision on what data they want to use. They still have to use data. We're not getting away from using data. We're just putting it in the property owner's hands for 2 years. And at that point, once it can go through the Drainage Task Force, we should be able to come up with some good policies. So anyway, again, I would very much urge your support on this bill.
First discussion on the amendment. Chair sees none. Question is on the, would the author like to close? Question is on the adoption of the amendment. All those in favor in case saying aye. Aye. Those opposed no. Motion is adopted. Are there further amendments? House motion, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
She needs to read it.
Senate Bill 242, Amendment 1. Mr. Speaker, I move that engross Senate Bill 242.
Further motion is second. The chair recognizes Representative Hamilton to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I am putting forward an amendment that restores the language in code requiring best available data and asking the task force to look more closely at these issues so that we can have a very critical conversation with all of the experts in the room. What I'm hearing this morning is we have some conflicting understanding amongst experts, and that's unfortunate. What I'm hearing is that what DNR has put forward as best available data is the best available data, that the feds will likely believe that to be true, that we are potentially putting properties at risk of losing federal protection without using these maps. I also believe, I will acknowledge, and I think DNR, the agency, has acknowledged that there was not a great rollout of information to communities about the new maps they were using, and I think that's unfortunate. But we're looking forward here, and I think we have a responsibility to protect communities from flooding and to eliminate any new construction in flood zones, which the current language does. So I would encourage you to support this amendment. Thank you.
Roll call has been requested and seconded. Will be recognized. Further discussion on the amendment. Representative Baird speak on the amendment. Author yields. She yields.
I feel like we're having the same conversation again. Are these maps currently, the state LIDAR maps, currently recognized by FEMA?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And if they were recognized by FEMA, was the process followed for these state maps to be engrossed by FEMA?
What I know to be my understanding is that DNR believes that these are the best maps available, that would apply for...
That's not my question. My question is about FEMA and if the process was followed.
I am not sure.
Permission to speak?
You're recognized, Representative Baird.
So currently, these maps are not recognized by FEMA, and the reason is these maps should have been sent to FEMA, and the process was not followed. When FEMA receives these state maps, and once they're adopted by FEMA, landowners are notified, and that's what's led to the premise of this whole conversation and where all the confusion is really coming from. And I think Representative Abbott has already articulated very well some of his talking points. I mean, this literally is the same conversation. I'd ask you to defeat the motion.
For discussion on the amendment, Chair sees none. Will you authorize to close?
I did acknowledge and will acknowledge again that DNR has said that the rollout has not been what it should have been. Again, I would say we need to be responsible and look forward and not build in flood zones, in floodplains, and that's what we are at concern of happening if we do not accept this amendment and leave 242 as it is today. Thank you.
Roll call has been requested and a second will be granted. When the machine is open, all those in favor of the amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. All the members. I can't do the simplest of things. If all the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 27 ayes, 66 noes. Amendment's been defeated. Are there further amendments? Chair sees none. Bills over to engrossment. Senate Bill 321, Representative Teshka. Representative Teshka passes. Senate Bill 369, Representative Pressel. Chair hands down second reading, Senate Bill 369.
Senate Bill 369, a bill for an act amending...
Bill's ready for amendment, recommitment, engrossment. House motion, Representative Pressel.
Senate Bill 369, Amendment 4. Mr. Speaker, I move that engross Senate Bill 3...
For the amendment, is there a second? Chair recognizes Representative Pressel to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Amendment number 4 changes 2 shall provisions in the underlying bill to mays. And then it also adds that if a school corporation or charter school completes the tasks set forth in the may provision, that they may apply for the school safety grant. It also adds language for the Department of Education to do a statewide survey of the school corporations to determine how many AEDs currently exist and if they have a plan in place on how to implement them, where are they located, what is our plan going forward with these. And it asks that they report that back by December 31st to the Ledge Council. I would appreciate your support with amendment number 4.
First discussion on the amendment. Chair sees none. Will the author like to close? He would not. Questions on the adoption of the amendment. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. Are there further amendments? Chair sees none. Bills over to engrossment. Senate Bill 380, Representative Behning. Chair hands down on second reading, Senate Bill 380.
Senate Bill 380, a bill for an act amending the Indiana Code.
Bills ready for amendment, recommitment, engrossment. Chair sees none. Bills over to engrossment. Senate Bill 434, Representative Slager. Chair hands down second reading, Senate Bill 434.
Senate Bill 434, a bill for an act amending the Indiana Code.
Bills ready for amendment, recommitment, engrossment. House motion, Representative Slager.
Senate Bill 434, Amendment 2. Mr. Speaker, I move that engross Senate Bill.
Chair, you've heard the motion in a second. The chair recognizes Representative Slager to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this would be number 2. It's the same as number 1. There was a technical correction we needed, so we had the time, so we held it. This is a bill that creates a framework for the financial and operational framework, if you will, for a number of projects in Lake County. And as these things go, the stakeholders keep getting back to us with some more details. It looks like a lot in the summary. I want to just go over some of the highlights for your benefit. There are two authorities that we created in this bill. In both of those authorities, we established some professional requirement that they have some commercial facility management experience. That's all we added in both of those authorities. We clarified some language on what the convention authority would be doing, and not necessarily operating, but what their role would be. I read in a published report that a county councilman was not pleased that they didn't have budget oversight on a reserve fund that we created, and I thought, actually, that's a pretty good idea. So we changed a fund that didn't need to be a state fund to a county fund because it only handled money that the county was raising through the innkeeper's tax. The casino wanted to alter some language that references one of the local development agreements. We extracted that language so that it didn't create a conflict. We also clarified the difference between the Gary Metro train platform and the Metro Center, making it clear that the NICD would be, which is the rail district, that they would be responsible for the platform, and also clarified the Regional Development Authority's role as it related to the reconstruction of the Metro Center. Those are the highlights of a number of technical corrections in the bill. Happy to answer any questions.
First discussion on the amendment. Chair sees none. With the author to close would not. Question is on the adoption of the amendment. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. Are there further amendments? Chair sees none. Bills ordered to engrossment. Senate Bill 486, Representative Teshka. Chair hands down second reading, Senate Bill 486.
Senate Bill 486, a bill for enactment of the Indiana Code concerning a...
Bill is ready for amendment, recommitment, or engrossment. House motion, Representative Teshka.
Senate Bill 486, Amendment 3. Mr. Speaker, I move that engross Senate Bill 486.
For the motion and second, the chair recognizes Representative Teshka to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. This amendment essentially ensures that the bill conforms to the intent of the committee. When the bill came over from the Senate, it had a few requirements for certain trainings removed on an ongoing basis for educators, and instead it placed those requirements on the teacher prep programs, and we reinstated some of those ongoing requirements for trainings and mistakenly left the requirement on the teacher prep program, and so it's duplicative. So this removes it from the teacher prep program, a few of those requirements. And the second thing it does is, after committee and the committee amendment, we noticed that there was one remaining reference to discussion in the bill, and so this gets rid of that as well. So pretty much just technical issues conforming it to the intent of the committee, and I would appreciate your support.
For discussion on the amendment, Representative Pierce speak on the amendment. The author yield, he yields.
Thank you, Representative. You described the amendment as technical, but won't it have a substantive effect? So if you've got still something left in the bill that says there shall be discussion about this and you're taking it out because you missed it, doesn't it have a substantive impact?
I suppose it does, except for, you know, the bill itself, the amendment, in committee, and the bill itself contemplated getting rid of all of that talk about discussion, and really, I would contend that this remaining reference doesn't really make sense without the rest of the language in there.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Permission to speak.
You're right now, Representative Pierce.
Well, I guess it's. I have to admit I haven't carefully studied the amendment, but sometimes we describe things as technical and maybe aren't so much. So, you know, if you like the idea of preserving the ability for people to have discussion on these topics, then maybe you don't want to take the last remaining one out, even if it kind of inadvertently got left in. So, just a thought.
Roll call has been requested and seconded. Will be granted. Would you like to, is there further discussion? Representative Teshka, would you like to close? Roll call has been requested and a second will be granted. When the machine is open, all those in favor of the amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 63 ayes, 29 noes. The amendment has been adopted. Are there further amendments? Representative DeLaney? House motion?
Senate Bill 486, Amendment 2. Mr. Speaker, I move that engross.
Heard the amendment in the second. Chair recognizes Representative DeLaney to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I consider this to be one of the more important discussions of the year in regard to educational policy. So I'm going to take a little time with this, and I'm going to give you a little history. In the good year of 1973, Governor Otis Bowen, a Republican, signed a bill that came out of the Republican-controlled House and the Republican-controlled Senate that was designed to regulate collective bargaining between teachers and their districts, their district employers. It was well thought out, and it's still, in many ways, effective here. And it divided the world into two very distinct things that I think we need to understand. One is collective bargaining. That's a labor negotiation context or idea that leads to a contract. And in that bill, in 1973, that law, and still in today's law, the scope of the contract is very narrow. Basically, wages, benefits. That's basically what it's about. The union meets with the superintendent and deals with the school board, and they enter into a contract on those very specific issues. Other matters are not allowed to be in the contract under the 1973 law and under the law as it exists today. These are matters for discussion, and they by law cannot be included in the contract, and they are not part officially of the contract negotiations. Instead, we go over a whole list of topics, class size, evaluations, and so forth, that teachers have concerns about. Not just union teachers. By the way, only the union is going to sign the contract. Don't get it confused with discussion. The discussion is for every teacher. They can go individually if they wanted to the superintendent, or they can go through the union. I would assume many people don't want to take their time to bring their specific concern to the superintendent, so they do it through the union for their convenience, whether they pay dues or not. The union has a duty of fair representation. So if teachers who flamingly say, I don't pay dues, I don't want to pay dues, I hate labor unions, whatever they got to say, if they want a topic discussed that's on the list of topics, then it will be discussed. That's the distinction. What we're doing is eliminating the requirement that there be a discussion of these topics. We're getting rid of the word shall. So the core structure of our law is let's keep all these topics. And I'm going to take a moment and get the topics in front of me. It includes class size, for example, student discipline, and on and on. We're going to take those topics and say that if the superintendent feels like discussing it, they may, instead of they shall. They may, if they feel like it, discuss it with an individual teacher, or they may, if they feel like it, talk with the union. That will be their choice. What, of course, happens in the real world is that if you don't have ongoing discussions, if you don't treat teachers fairly about things like class size or whatever disciplinary concerns they have, they will fester. That's how humans behave. They will be angry. And when it does come to the time for the contract negotiation, my friends, that anger will be expressed at the contract negotiations, no matter how narrowly you limit those conversations. So what we're choosing, and what we understood in 1973, was that we want labor peace and happy teachers. The list in 1973, which you could discuss, was teaching methods, selection, promotion, student discipline, pupil-teacher ratio, class size, essentially the same list we have today. So what we're saying is this no longer becomes a matter of right for our teachers or expectation for our citizens. This becomes an option of those superintendents who feel like doing it. That is a fundamentally dramatic change in the relationship. I am not personally a classroom teacher. I tried to teach in law school, found it almost impossible. So I have great sympathy for them. But you will, if you've read your mail, will see that many superintendents want to continue this process. You'll also, I hope, hear from Representative Pfaff about how her district handles this very, very important topic. But they have conversations. In some cases, they're regular, they're scheduled, and they have reports. So that ongoing over the course of the contract year, problems that arise can be addressed right then and there. And these are problems that cannot be addressed officially in the contract. So, discipline, for example, class size, for example, they can be discussed and resolved. That's the thing that's being forgotten. Discussed and resolved. That's what this forum of discussion is created for. Now, over the years, and I've witnessed, I guess, the tail end of this, some things that were discussion items that I read from 1973 got shoved into the negotiation part and were able to be addressed in the contract. Well, since I've been here, we have shoved all that back out. The discussion items are not eligible for inclusion in the contract. So voting for my amendment says, let's keep discussing, let's keep going with the informal arrangements that some of our districts have, where they resolve these matters on an ongoing basis, and let's support our teachers and our school systems that way. And let's not put our superintendents in the position where they have to, as an act of grace or kindness, agree to discuss. You know, I think my greatest leadership lessons came in the Navy. And one of the things they taught us was if you want people to follow you, you have to be loyal downward. It's not a one-way street where the troops, in this case the teachers, are loyal to you. You have to be loyal to them. The legislature has to be loyal to our teachers in our schools. We have been there for 50 years with this structure, requiring these conversations. And guess what we've had? By my reckoning, I grew up in a different state and I watch what goes on in Illinois, we've had labor peace in our school systems. Have you asked yourself why? Is it because Hoosiers are nice? Or is it because this legislature for 50 years set up a procedure to take the steam off in our schools, to give our teachers, whether through the union or individually, a vehicle to vent that steam? That's what this provision is. And I'm not going to hold back and kid you. The only thing left, if you don't pass my amendment, the only thing left is negotiating about wages and benefits. So the whole process of a guaranteed adult relationship between schools and teachers, between the superintendents and the teachers, will disappear after 50 years. I hope to God that doesn't lead to more labor unrest. But where I come from, in those districts, the people I grew up with, the people you grew up with, if you tell people long enough that we're not going to talk about that, we're done talking with that, we don't have to talk about that. We don't have to talk about class size or student discipline or who got expelled from school. That's none of your business. I'm the superintendent. Any district where they take that position will have a problem. We should spare them that. You know, there's this great big fetish in this place, which I sometimes share in part, to deregulate. We got to deregulate. So we're getting rid of some of these requirements. We just did another amendment, you know, to teach about this or prepare teachers about that or put this in teacher preparation or have each teacher do this every year. Those are regulations, and it's a judgment call as to which ones are excessive. This is not a regulation, this bit about discussing. This is a fundamental part of teacher-employer relations. It's something that helps. They conduct it. They talk as often as they want to on whatever format they want to. We're not telling them that. All we're telling them is that these are things that must be discussed. The superintendent must hear the position on these issues. How they do it, how often they do it, when they do it, whether they enjoy themselves, that's their business. We set up 50 years ago a structure. It has worked. If you don't vote for this amendment, you are undercutting it. You're going to leave each superintendent under pressure to decide whether they want to talk or not and on what topics they want to talk. Some of them are going to make the wrong decision. And we're not going to have the peaceful, intelligent relationships that we've had. Our teachers will have a choice. Suck it up, hate the place you work, or go on strike. That's the choice you leave them if we can't have conversation. That is, I see some people, look, I don't know where you've been, Representative Karakoff. I don't know what experience you have in life, but my experience is that people whose grievances aren't heard don't react well. And I understand most of our superintendents are lovely people who will hear everybody talk about whatever they want to talk to. We don't need to legislate for that person. We're legislating for that percentage of people who get appointed superintendents and get themselves confused with something other than a normal human. They think they have some special power or special role. Those are the people. For 50 years, we've said we got to have these discussions. We haven't had mass resignations from superintendents because they're under this onerous requirement imposed by Dr. Bowen. That's not what's happened. If you want to support the teachers, other than pay, you've got to give them status. You've got to recognize their role, their ability to speak for themselves, and their ability to be listened to. So I ask you to vote for this amendment. I ask for a roll call.
Roll call amendment request and second will be granted. For discussion on the amendment, Representative Teshka speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate Representative DeLaney's amendment, and I appreciate the great discussion that we had in committee. On this issue, we heard quite a bit of testimony. We heard from educators. We heard from local association representatives. We also heard from members of the Indiana School Boards Association, the Indiana Superintendents Association, the Principals Association. And yes, there were differing opinions on this issue. But to a person, all of them indicated that these discussions, whether or not this is a may or a shall, will continue to happen. No superintendent worth their salt is going to tell a teacher that they will not discuss with them any concerns that they might have in their building. And so what we're talking about here is giving the locals more flexibility to create their own structure for how these discussions take place, rather than the state being so prescriptive about a formal process. And we heard from the Superintendents Association in particular that this might actually improve relations with their teachers. He likened it to court-appointed marriage counseling. You can tell two disputing marriage partners that they have to get together and talk, but if their hearts aren't in it, is it going to do any good? I'd also like to point out that Representative DeLaney talked about teachers who are not part of the union being able to discuss. Well, the law is very specific. It says that the school leaders shall discuss with the exclusive representative. And so we're not talking about teachers who are not union members here. Those teachers can already go and approach their superintendent and talk to them about their issues. And that will continue. These discussions will continue to happen. We are not, as a state legislature, responsible for the bad decisions of a few actors. And so we have faith in our school leaders. Over and over again in committee and here today, what I'm hearing is that we don't have faith in our school leaders and our teachers to be able to have these adult conversations without the state interjecting itself. This whole bill is about deregulation. It's about flexibility. From the last 3 years, as I've been on the education committee, we've had educators and superintendents and principals all come up to these microphones and say, we want help with regulatory relief. That's what this bill aims to do. And by accepting Representative DeLaney's amendment, we will defeat the purpose of that. And so I ask that you defeat the amendment. Thank you.
First discussion on the amendment, Representative Klinker, speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, part of 486 is a good idea to get rid of some of the mandates that are included in 486. But the real trouble with 486 and the negative part of that is to say may discuss. I can tell you as a negotiator for 9 years for teachers that the discussables and the discussions alleviated many of our issues that might have led to a difficult situation or a strike. And as a person that has been through a strike for 6 days, I can tell you that discussables are very important. When collective bargaining started, it was a difficult situation in the 70s. And people weren't sure just how they should participate or what they should say. When discussions came about with Dr. Bowen, it changed the whole parameter. We were able to discuss things very logically and without fear, and that's very important in a situation with teachers and administrators. We were able to discuss class size with prime time, as many of you remember. Prime time was very important, talking about class size, and that came about by discussables and discussions with not only superintendents, principals, and teachers, but also with legislators. We passed prime time. So what I'm saying to you is that the discussion process has alleviated many problems throughout history since collective bargaining passed in order to have, let me say, a more peaceful situation and a camaraderie that has occurred. Many of you have not seen teacher strikes throughout the state in many years. And the reason for that is the discussion process, being able to discuss without being at the collective bargaining table. It has worked in our school corporation, and it's worked in many of yours. So I ask you to vote yes for this amendment and keep discussables available with a shall. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you.
For discussion on the amendment, Representative Pfaff, speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. This is my 30th year of teaching. I just finished in December, and I will go back in May. And I can tell you from experience that open dialogue makes relationships stronger. Communication is a team sport, and both administrators and teachers for 50 years are better when they work together. In my school, every month, the administration team sits down with a group of teachers and discusses the concerns, be it dress code violations, student fights, too many disruptions during classes, or a host of other issues. We teachers are the boots on the ground, and we help the administration to address issues that arise on a daily basis. The meetings are on the calendar, and time is set aside to solve problems together. It's already local control. Taking this away will hurt communication. It will say, maybe we can talk later, and maybe we can't. I ask you to support this amendment.
For discussion on the amendment, Representative Moseley speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, on several occasions, I have sat in on teacher negotiations with the school board. I was on the school board for 10 years, almost 10 years. And something I learned from that experience is that, well, a lot of you folks here are employers, and you have employees. And some of the things I learned in those negotiations are that your best employees, I believe, are the ones that feel that they have value. One of the ways to be able to instill value in an employee, I believe, is to have the ability to listen and understand what's important to them on what helps them do the best job they can do. And that means sitting across the table and being collaborative and being made to feel that you're a partner in creating the best outcomes for the students in that school. It also helps resolve issues in the classroom. I can tell you the school superintendent, while they may be the best that money can buy, so to speak, they can't know and understand every issue that may be something that could be resolved at the table when it comes time for these discussions. I've seen it. It also creates an opportunity for new ideas to emerge that can make the learning experience better for the student. It can create opportunities to improve school curriculum. So having an opportunity to open up discussion about all of these different things between the school board and the Teachers Association, or not the Teachers Association, because when you're having these discussions, you're discussing every teacher in the school, every educator, not just those that belong to the association, but everyone that has a contract with that school corporation. I heard Representative Teshka make the comment that any superintendent worth their salt is not going to tell a teacher, it's not going to say that they will not discuss issues with them. Well, I tend to agree with Representative Teshka, which brings me to the question, why do we need this if no superintendent worth their salt is going to create an issue? So, having been somebody that's been at the table, I would encourage you to please give some consideration to my thoughts and my comments today. Thank you.
For discussion on the amendment, Representative Smith to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I rise to support the amendment. I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. I'm a disciple of Martin Luther King. I'm a disciple of Paul Harvey. I'm also a disciple of Bobby Kennedy. And Bobby Kennedy said on one occasion that every individual can make a difference and that every individual has an obligation to make the world a better place. I believe people can make a difference. If it's to be, it's up to me, and it ought to start with you. It ought to start with me. But one thing that I've come to understand in tracing change in education and improvements that have been made in education is that on an individual basis, the process has not worked. It has been through the collective efforts of unions and the collective action that have brought about the changes, the positive changes in public education. The simplest and the strongest argument for unions and collective action is that together they have accomplished things that were necessary to improve education. People have mixed feelings about unions, but the research will show that there are 4 major benefits that have come out of collective bargaining. 1, better conditions for students and for educators. Number 2, educator-led answers to student needs. Don't forget that teachers are the practitioners. They are the ones that are in the classroom. And if you're going to have strong academic achievement, the teachers know what needs to be done, and they know what is needed. Yes, a building leader has some ideas, but they're not working directly with students on a daily basis. Number 3, it retains the highest quality of employees in the profession. When teachers are not satisfied with working conditions, when their hearts are in students achieving, they have passion for what they're doing, they will not stay in a situation that is toxic. And you see that happening today with the dance of the teachers or the dance of the lemons, where we bring in people who are not prepared, and they're just moving from one location to the other or dropping out. Some of the charter schools in my area, we've had some people who are not certified, and they've just walked off of the job. Just walked off, just left. You have to be concerned about the climate and the culture of the schools. And number 4, through collective bargaining, we've been able to make major improvements in safety and the well-being of students and educators. So with those reasons in mind, I'm here to tell you that there are 2 things that make schools effective. You find them, they're the threads through effective schools. The first one is that you have to have good communication. The second one is that effective schools have collaboration. There's no big I's and small U's. It's about us. The pronoun becomes we. If you don't have the collaboration, if you don't have the communication, then what happens is you're not effective. I've always said you get more touchdowns when everybody knows what you're doing. And we're trying to make major touchdowns, many touchdowns in education. Collaboration has great value. Communication has great value. It helps with problem solving. Collaboration and good communication brings people and organizations closer together. Collaboration helps people learn from each other. There's none of us as smart as all of us. There's none. The best idea can be sharpened. It can be made better. If I add my knowledge to what you know, then we both know more than what we did know initially. Collaboration helps people learn from each other. It opens up new channels of communication. Collaboration and good communication boosts the morale of the organization. It leads to higher retention rates. Dissatisfied campers are going to look for another place to go and camp out. Communication and collaboration leads to new ideas. Somebody has a spark of idea and somebody fine-tunes it and makes it even better. It increases productivity. Individuals learn through communication and collaboration, to have varied perspectives. It leads to improved relationships. When people feel like they're being heard, when you go in individually, you're not sure if you're going to be heard, because many times they'll ask you, well, do you have support for your idea? Because change in school, as was indicated by Larry Zott, change doesn't come classroom by classroom, it comes school by school. So it ought to be a collective process, not an individual process. Yes, one teacher can be an irritant, but guess what all of them can do collectively? It leads to improved relationships. It provides innovative solutions. Participants learn from one another, leading to increased knowledge. And when people work together, there's enhanced efficiency. There's less isolation, and a sense of community in the school is developed. We need shared leadership. That is what is being taught as we prepare future educational leaders. We've studied the different styles of leadership, the autocrat, the Democrat, and the laissez-faire person. We know through the democratic process, that's how we get effective schools. The democratic process calls for good communication. It calls for collaboration. I'm telling you, and I want to underscore what was said before by the previous speaker, and that is, if you expect people to do this anyway, well, why tamper with this? People ought to know what the goal is. That's what we should be setting policy and goals. When you strike it out, what you're saying is this is not important. And I tell you, I'm older than black dirt. I was here when they created apple pies. I have been here a long time in education. And I'm here to tell you that if you touch this issue and you do what you intend to do with it, you're making a terrible mistake. We make policy here and we don't look at the unintended consequences. And I'm telling you, there's going to be some unintended consequences if we pass this bill and do it in the way that's been described by the author and the sponsors. Representative DeLaney understands. I hope after all of our presentations, you understand the importance of his amendment and that you will support it. Not for unions, but for the benefit of the children who have been the benefactors of all the efforts that I've outlined for you in the areas that are outlined presently in the code. I urge you to support this amendment.
For discussion on the amendment, Representative Boyd speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I'm going to make this short. I have a wonderful superintendent in my school system. She is the biggest cheerleader for the city, the schools, and the teachers you could ever meet. But we have had some others in the past whose attitude was, the beatings will continue until morale improves. And if we do not make this a shall, we will end up with some school systems that will have this problem. And I think we need to support this amendment. Thank you.
For discussion on the amendment, Chair sees none. Would you like to close, Representative DeLaney?
You know, we have a lot of customs and courtesies here, one of which is the speaker asks the proponent of an amendment whether they would like to close. The truth of the matter is I prefer not to close. I would prefer to have heard from at least one more member of the supermajority as to why my amendment is wrong and why our teachers should be denied this opportunity. What's happening here today is a model of what can happen in our school districts. Somebody stands up and expresses their complaint and is met with deafening silence. No debate, no response. This has gone on too long this year in this place. This is too important a bill for all this silence. We have teachers over here. We have people who've been on school boards. We have people who've negotiated contracts under traditional labor agreements. We have people who hate labor unions. We got all kinds of people on your side who could contribute to a discussion. Hasn't happened. We on this side will not be any better informed as to what you thought than we were when we walked in here. And the public will be denied the benefit of your reasons. And let's see just exactly what you're doing. You're changing a law that says a school employer, and that's what we're talking about, these are employers, shall discuss certain items. I'll come back to them. And instead of saying they shall discuss these items, it now says that they can discuss they may discuss with a certified employee or a group of them at meetings if they choose, any topic that significantly impacts a certificated employee's working conditions or impacts the educational quality of the school employer's students. We ought to put that on a card, like where you read, remember you have the right to remain silent. We ought to read that to our teachers. If you can pass this test, that this significantly impacts their working conditions, maybe I'll discuss it with you. And what are the things that not one of which the majority pointed to as a problem? This list, by the way, has gone up and down over 50 years with the help of many people who sit here today. So we'll not be required to discuss curriculum development. We'll not be required to discuss the selection of curricular materials. We can come down to the State House and talk about what books people should read or not read in our schools, but our teachers have no right to insist on discussing that with their superintendent. Teaching methods, we cannot require any discussion of teaching methods. One of the things that's happened is, we're learning about teaching methods. We're learning a lot about phonics. My friends on this side of the aisle have been very hot on that issue. And one of the reasons we know that we kind of got adrift on that topic is that our teachers could talk to their superintendents and vice versa. There's no requirement to talk about student discipline or hiring or promotions. No requirement to talk about expelling students or suspending them. No need to talk about pupil-teacher ratio. No need to talk about class size. No need to talk about budget appropriations. No need to talk about safety issues. How's that one? If you vote against my amendment, you are voting that our teachers have no right to insist on a discussion about their personal safety in their schools in a country where teachers are being shot by 6-year-olds. But God forbid we should require a conversation on that topic, a conversation that's gone on for 50 years. No need to talk about working hours. Why would you want to talk about that? And there's a couple others, like the teacher performance model, how you evaluate teachers, and the use of adjunct teachers, but I think I've covered the big ones. That is a remarkable list put together over 50 years, during which my recall is we Democrats may have been in charge 20% of the time. There were a couple times when we were tied 50-50. So 50 years of legislative experience, 50 years of experience in the school system is to be ignored and not explained. God forbid we explain why we're ignoring this. There were 2 quotes from the one member of the majority who was willing to speak on the issue. He said that no one worth their salt wouldn't talk. Apparently he has belief that all of our superintendents will always be worth their salt. But he went on to say that we're not responsible for bad actors. I'm sorry. I feel that I am responsible for the bad actors. I'm responsible for preventing bad acting by any superintendent or any school board that wants to take that position. I don't understand what's going on now, because for 50 years we moved items in and out of what could be discussed. Suddenly we have to wipe the whole thing out. They were all wrong all this time, apparently. Teachers are not regular employees. They are the trustees of our children. Can I say that again? They are the trustees of our children. They are responsible for the day-to-day education and care of our children. They're not easily replaced. They should not be ignored. We're the trustee of the system, and we refuse to act upon that. If this bill goes through without my amendment, it will be the fruit of a non-discussion. It will be a model for what the school superintendent should do. Cross your arms. Tell them you're busy. Tell them you don't like to talk about that. Tell them, I used to have to talk about that, but I don't have to talk about that anymore. That won't happen a lot. I agree with that completely. But my job is to make sure it doesn't happen at all. If you vote for my amendment, you can make sure you're doing your job on that point. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Roll call's been requested and second and will be granted when the machine is open. All those in favor of the amendment vote aye. Those opposed vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 32 ayes, 62 noes. The amendment has been defeated. Are there further amendments? Chair sees none. Bills over to engrossment. We'll move to the third reading calendar. Senate Bill 8, Representative Schaibley. Chair hands down on final passage, Senate Bill 8.
Senate Bill 8, a bill for enactment in the Indiana Code concerning.
Chair recognizes Representative Schaibley to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. I also want to thank Senate Bill 8's author, Senator Charbonneau, and Chairman Carbaugh for hearing the bill, and my co-sponsors, Representatives Barrett, Olthoff, and Porter. Senate Bill 8 is a bill that deals with the high cost of health care by addressing pharmacy rebate and insurance and PBM transparency. The transparency is, there is transparency in the first section as it requires PBMs to report certain information to the Department of Insurance, and the Commissioner must report that then to the Legislative Council. There, in the section regarding pharmacy rebates, the rebate language applies to both individual and group insurance policies, and it requires that the insurer either apply 100% of the prescription drug rebate to reduce premiums, or return at least 85% of the rebate to the patient at the point of sale. It also ensures that this ensures that the individual will receive the benefits of the rebate either directly or through the point of sale or through premium reductions. The next section, there is language that states that nothing that will prohibit a insurer from implementing a program designed to lower the individual's defined cost sharing. And then finally, it's regarding the insurance transparency. It says that on request of a plan sponsor, the insurer shall disclose the approximate aggregate amount of rebates in the preceding year and the expected aggregate amount of rebates in the following year concerning the administration of prescription drugs to the plan's covered individuals. And this will help them decide how they want to set up their plans, because they'll know how much rebates are involved in that. This provides transparency for the organizations. I want to thank you and ask you for your support of this, and it passed the Senate 42-5 and the House Insurance Committee 9-1. Thank you.
First discussion on the bill. Chair sees none. The author's right closely waives it. Questions on final passage of the bill. All those in favor will machines vote aye. Those opposed vote no. All the members voted. Tally the roll. Roll call shows 94 ayes, 0 noes. The bill has passed. Shall I tell the bill remain in title of the act? Representative Schaibley? The clerk shall inform us of the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 325, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Senate Bill 325 be returned to the second reading calendar forthwith for the purpose of amendment. Representative.
For the motion in a second. All those in favor, in case saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. 325 goes back to second reading calendar. Senate Bill 326, Representative Teshka. Chair hands down on final passage Senate Bill 326.
Senate Bill 326, a bill for enactment in the Indiana Code.
Chair recognizes Representative Teshka to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Senate Bill 326 deals with professional sports development areas, and specifically the bill as it was introduced in the Senate was about South Bend's professional sports development area. The bill essentially lifts the cap from $2 million to $5 million in total capture in the district and extends the time period. The South Bend Cubs came to South Bend not too long ago, within the last decade, and they have done major renovations to the stadium. They have driven over 3.2 million visitors to that area, and it's been a great bright spot in our downtown in South Bend. This would allow them to make further improvements to the stadium. It would allow them to add an upper deck, and Mr. Berlin, the owner of the South Bend Cubs, has pledged to put in at least another $40 or $50 million into the stadium, driving further regional tourism in the area. And as the bill came out of the Senate unanimously and went through our Ways and Means Committee, there were a couple of additions. One addition was the addition of a Fishers PSCDA. And that Fishers district will help Fishers build a stadium for the Indy Fuel, a hockey team. And then the last addition in Ways and Means here in the House was to lift the amount of capture that the Evansville PSCDA can collect. And that will be used to do about $3.5 million in capital improvements to the Ford Center there in Evansville. Again, as I stated, the bill came out of the Senate unanimously, came out of Ways and Means here in the House unanimously. I would appreciate your support and like to thank my co-authors, Representatives Bauer, Jordan, and Garcia Wilburn. With that, I appreciate your vote. Thank you.
First discussion on the bill. Chair sees none. The author has the right to close your ways. The question is on file. Pass the bill. All those in favor, Wilburn, Machines open, vote aye. No. Those opposed, no. While the members vote, the title of the roll. Roll call shows 85 ayes, 9 noes. The bill has passed. Title of the bill remaining title of the act. Clerk shall inform Senate the passage of the bill. Senate Bill 419, Representative Thompson. Representative Thompson passes. Representative Thompson passes. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House dissent from the Senate amendments to engross House Bill 1212 and that the Speaker appoint a committee.
For the motion, in the second, all those in favor, in case saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the concurrence filed on April 10, 2023 be withdrawn, that the House do now dissent from Senate amendments to engross House Bill 1466 and that the Speaker appoint.
For the motion in the second, all those in favor, in case saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. Just a reminder that we are releasing conferees online, and quite a few of them were released last night. I appreciate Leader G. Quinta's help in facilitating that. Please remember that those do not have to be announced on the floor. Only changes need to be announced from the floor. So please check the website regarding your conferee, whether you're a conferee or an advisor. If you need help, I'm sure your legislative assistants can assist you with that. With that being said, Representative Patterson for a motion. Heard the motion in a second. All those in favor, in case saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. We are adjourned. What are you doing, Jeff? Waiting to get your voice?